Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name is Mateo Chavez Lewis, and this is To Build Myself a Show. I've been away because I've been in rehearsals to play Jinx in a production of Forever Plaid, and by the time you are watching this, we will be open. The show is in Niagara Falls, so if you're in the area, get your tickets as soon as possible because we run only until the 13th of January, so get your tickets there at the link in the description. This video gets its title from Blake Snyder's story structuring framework, which is called Save the Cat, and maybe you've heard of it. In that framework, the fun and games refers to this huge chunk of story. The protagonists explore the world of the story, the central relationship starts to deepen, and the conflict slowly starts to build. This basically encompasses everything leading up to the midpoint of the story, which in a musical, obviously, is the Act 1 finale. And that's where the conflict in the story kind of reaches a fever pitch, and there's a turning point in the story. You know, even if a musical doesn't have an intermission, it's usually kind of split up into first half, second half like this. Most musicals, even if they're performed straight through without an intermission, have like a kind of Act 1 finale number somewhere in there. Like, for example, Come From Away is performed just 100 minutes straight, no intermission, but it still has the screech in number, which comes at about the halfway point, and is this big, huge musical number with kind of a big turning point for all the protagonists in the show. But more on Act 1 finales in a future video. According to Jack Viertel's book, The Secret Life of the American Musical, which this whole series is based on, the Act 1 finale has to be like a moment of huge tension where all the conflict so far explodes. And so it makes sense that we spend a lot of time building up that conflict, you know, half an hour, maybe even a full hour in some longer musicals. And so that's what this chunk of your musical is, this kind of Act 1 chunk. After we've introduced everything, we've introduced the world of the show, we've introduced the protagonist and the conflict, and we've introduced the central relationship. So now that we've introduced everything important, now this fun and games section is where we just build up the tension. And in Blake Snyder, I think Blake Snyder would kind of agree with this because the fun and games section of Save the Cat is the longest chunk in that framework. It's a long time, and it's where the story kind of starts to deviate from structure and becomes a little bit more its own unique thing, a little bit more unpredictable. And it's all building towards this midpoint. So Jack Viertel outlines a couple of musical numbers which kind of help do that, you know, build the tension towards that Act 1 finale while keeping the audience like entertained and engaged. So in this video I'm going to look at 6 of those musical numbers that you can put into your Act 1 of your musical. You can pick and choose like which ones of these that you want to apply to your own show. You can reorder them in whatever order you want. This is kind of where the structure becomes a little bit less rigid and we have more freedom. You have to introduce the world, and you have to introduce the protagonist, and you have to introduce the central relationship in the first like 15 to 30 minutes of your show. Otherwise the audience isn't going to know what's going on. So those are really, really, really important. But once you get here, you know, you've kind of introduced everything important, and now is where you can kind of play with it. So these are all ideas for things, but you don't have to strictly follow them, and most good musicals don't strictly follow them because most good musicals are not only formulaic. They also have a lot of heart and originality to them. So a lot of the art of creating a musical happens in this chunk where you have the freedom to deviate from the formula, but you want to stick to the formula just enough that you can tell your story clearly. So it's finding that kind of balance. But yes, each one of these 6 musical numbers I'm going to talk about in this video is just an option for you, a tool that you can use to help yourself navigate the muddy waters of Act 1 of your musical. Let's dive in. Number 1, the noise. Good musicals tell a good story, and they tell it really, really well. But a musical should also be entertaining. You don't want to tire your audience out, right? Because no matter how good your story is, it doesn't matter if your audience doesn't have the mental capacity to like follow along. So that's what this musical number is for. The noise is what Jack Viertel calls it. Usually it comes at the very beginning of this like fun and games chunk because it comes after we've introduced the world and we've introduced the protagonist and we've introduced the conflict and we've introduced the relationship, and the audience is kind of overwhelmed and has a lot of information. They're kind of inundated with all of these new things. And so this number, the point of it is to just kind of give the audience a moment to relax and process everything they've just learned. So it helps to have like a really fun song and dance number here, just to kind of get the audience's energy up. In some musicals, this song has almost no plot value. For example, in Book of Mormon, they have Turn It Off, which is basically just a bunch of Mormons tap dancing for kind of no reason. I mean, you know, it highlights the conflict between the Mormons and the Ugandans, and so it's functional in that way, but it doesn't advance the plot. But like, that works in Book of Mormon because it's so silly, and it makes sense to just have a fun song and dance number just to make the audience laugh and enjoy themselves, because that's the style that it is. But in musicals that are a little bit more dramatic, it really helps to integrate this into the storyline somehow. So for example, in Wicked, the noise is Dancing Through Life. It's this big dance number. You have the whole cast dancing at the Ozdas Ballroom. But it also is a huge step forward in Elphaba and Glinda's relationship. When Elphaba shows up to the dance and Glinda feels bad for her and dances with her. So they kind of go from being enemies to being friends in the course of this one really long song and dance number. So it moves the story forward, but it's also just a ton of fun and just really easy for the audience to watch, which is really important as well because they need a break. Number 2, the subplot. At some point during Act 1 of a musical, the musical will introduce its subplot. Sometimes this takes more than one musical number, actually. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 musical numbers. But generally the idea is that the subplot is going to be kind of reappearing throughout the show, just to give the audience a break whenever they need one, a break from the main plot. For them to kind of just like process what's just happened in the main plot. Sometimes they need a little bit of time and space in order to process that before they return to the main storyline. But also the subplot will often encourage the audience to reflect more deeply on the main plot because it's going to explore kind of the same themes in a little bit of a different way. So it kind of holds up like a mirror to the main plot. It acts as a bit of a foil. And so this idea of using the subplot as like a foil to the main plot dates all the way back to like operetta times, like Gilbert and Sullivan, like the late 19th century. But it kind of came into its own in the modern day musical theater with Oscar Hammerstein's work on the romantic musicals of the 40s and 50s. Because in those musicals, there was like always this like central couple who was very romantic and usually like a soprano and a bass who would sing these glorious love duets together. And then there would be a secondary couple who was usually an alto and a tenor and was like more comedic, would like make jokes and get the audience laughing, but also kind of explore the same themes that the main plot was exploring in a little bit of a more lighthearted way. So it would reflect on the first plot, while also giving the audience a break from the first plot to give them like time and space to process what's been going on. So like a really good example is The Sound of Music. Maria and the Captain Von Trapp are obviously the central couple of that show. But then you also have Rolf and Liesel. And, you know, that relationship between Rolf and Liesel sheds a new light on the relationship between Maria and the Captain. Because obviously Rolf becomes a Nazi, and that adds a new dimension to Maria and the Captain's need to escape Austria. So Hammerstein stuck to this structure of having 2 main couples for every major musical he ever wrote. And then other writers emulated him. For example, in Cabaret, Herr Schultz and Fräulein Schneider are torn apart by anti-Semitism. And that really amps up the conflict between Cliff and Sally, because Cliff wants to leave Germany, Sally doesn't want to leave Germany, so they have this conflict. Then when Herr Schultz and Fräulein Schneider break up, that like doubles or triples Cliff's need to get out of Germany. So it doubles or triples the conflict between him and Sally. In the modern day though, because the central relationship is usually not a romantic relationship between the 2 protagonists, the subplot is usually not a romantic relationship between 2 secondary characters. In fact, the subplot in modern day musicals is usually a romantic relationship between the protagonist and a secondary character who serves as like a love interest. And who like influences the protagonist, you know, changes them in a way, teaches them something. For example, you have Elphaba and Fiyero in Wicked. You have Nibelungi and Elder Cunningham in Book of Mormon. And you have Evan and Zoe's relationship in Dear Evan Hansen. A lot of these romantic relationships are set up at this point in the show, under the like subplot category. Something else that's really interesting is that because in modern day musicals we haven't had any love duets yet by this point. You know, in the oldie romantic musicals, usually the conditional love song setting up the central relationship of the show, and you can check out my video on central relationships right up here. But because the central relationship isn't romantic, we've set up this central relationship, but we still haven't had a love duet. And so oftentimes we'll get a love song here that is set up in the way that a conditional love song traditionally would be, which is to say, like If I Loved You. where the characters are kind of admitting their feelings to each other, but not really, and they're kind of flirting with each other, but not really. Like, that technique, using that dramatic irony to make the audience, like, really want these characters to get together, like, that still works just as well today as it did in the 1940s. Because we see these two characters who obviously like each other, and we're like, oh my god, just get together already, what are you doing? But I mean, the characters don't know yet that they like each other, like, maybe one of the characters doesn't know yet that they like that person, but that person knows that, like, there's always some conflict there. So it builds conflict, you know? And that's really exciting to watch as an audience. So under this, like, category of subplot, we would have, like, If I Could Tell Her from Dear Evan Hansen, which is basically If I Loved You, rewritten to be set 100 years later and sung by a gawky teenage boy. We also have I'm Not That Girl from Wicked, which doubles as number 3, The Star Turn. This one is pretty straightforward. I mean, if you've got a musical with a major star in it, you should probably have that star sing because everyone in that audience paid the ticket money so that they could see this star sing. And if they haven't sung since the I Want number, like, it might be time for a new star song. But I mean, even if you don't have a major star in your show, you should probably give the audience to check in with the protagonist. I mean, it's pretty easy to kind of lose track of who you're cheering for in the big, like, kerfuffle and noise that is a musical. So you kind of want your audience to remember who their best friend is of all of these people on the stage. It always helps to give your star a solo during this, like, fun and games section, just to kind of even just be like, hey, remember this person? Like, this is the person you're cheering for, just so you know. Don't forget, it's this person. And I mean, that number could be about anything. It doesn't even have to be about the character's main want. Like in Wicked, like I said, I'm Not That Girl totally has nothing to do with Elphaba's, like, wanting to meet the wizard or wanting to be accomplished or recognized or respected. I mean, it kind of has to do with her need to be respected because she doesn't feel like she's kind of up to the same social standard as the girl he chose. But ultimately, it's about a subplot. But it still gives us a chance to remember, oh yeah, Elphaba's the one we're cheering for. And that's the really important part. Number 4, the comedic relief. It always helps to have a number that's just funny. Even if your musical isn't a comedic one, it's really helpful to give the audience a chance to laugh. Think about it, even in, like, the darkest musicals, the most tragic musicals, there's usually a chance for the audience to laugh and just to get rid of release some of those feelings of darkness and despair so that they're then ready to engage back with those really serious themes. Like, you've got Sincerely Me in Dear Evan Hansen, you've got Master of the House in Les Mis, and if you are extra smart, you can even write a comedic number that reflects the themes of the show in a funny way. For example, at the surface level, it seems like Popular from Wicked is just Glinda bouncing around being hilarious. And that's great because Glinda's hilarious and the audience is like, wow, she's so funny. But if you listen to the words of that song, celebrated heads of state or especially great communicators, did they have brains or knowledge? Don't make me laugh. They were popular. Please, it's all about popular. That digs into the themes from the rest of the show. You know, the rest of the show is all about how we label people, and what's good and what's wicked is only based on how we label them, you know? And that kind of theme is in that song. So that's an example of a comedic song that's very, very clever and contributes to the thesis of the show, if you will. But most importantly, it's hilarious. It's just hilarious. Number 5, the villain song. Like I said, while yes, the purpose of the fun and games section is to explore and to have fun, it's also really important to build the tension to that Act 1 finale. A really good way to do this is to give your villain their own song. This can be in the literal sense, such as giving Hades the chance to sing Hey Little Songbird in Hadestown, or giving Frollo the chance to sing Hellfire in Hunchback of Notre Dame, or even giving Aaron Burr the chance to sing Wait For It in Hamilton. But not every musical has like a literal villain, like a character who is the antagonist, or sometimes they do have a villain, but they haven't introduced that villain yet. So this villain song can also just be a chance to paint the picture of something ominous coming, some danger that the protagonist isn't fully aware of yet, but just to make sure the audience knows, okay, things aren't going to be fun and games forever. Obviously, literally, something bad in Wicked does this really well. It's not a song for the villain because they haven't introduced the villain yet. The villain is only introduced at the end of Act 1. Spoiler alert, it's the wizard. But between Dr. Dilliman and Elphaba singing about like something bad happening to the animals, we start to get the sense that there is something a little bit scarier going on than just a green girl who doesn't fit in. The stakes are a little bit bigger. It's a little bit more of a global conflict. It's not just about Elphaba. And so us cheering for Elphaba becomes not just us cheering for Elphaba, but it also becomes us cheering for Elphaba to like save the world. So it becomes us cheering for the world. It raises the stakes, and that's huge. It's so important. Raise the stakes. And that's what's gonna make your conflict bubble. Another really good example is if we go back to 1964, when Fiddler on the Roof premiered on Broadway. That show has a song in it called To Life, which is just a very like drunken, raucous, celebratory number for no good reason. But then halfway through the number, a bunch of Russians jump up on the table and kind of hijack the celebration. And you know, nothing bad happens. The Russians kind of just join in, but they assert their dominance a little bit, and we get this feeling, again, something bad is gonna happen. You get the sense that something bad is on the horizon. You know, that's the really important part. Building that tension. And then obviously at the end of Act 1 of Fiddler, Sunrise, Sunset, the Russians storm into the wedding. Boom, that tension snaps like a rubber band. So it's good that we've built that tension with this like villain song moment. Number 6, the TENTPOLE. Jack Viertel calls this the TENTPOLE. It's basically just a number near the end of Act 1 that's just really high energy. It's like the full cast, singing, dancing, because it's important to give the audience kind of that boost of adrenaline that they need to just make it to the end of Act 1. This is One Short Day in Wicked, or the Battle of Yorktown in Hamilton. And there's a million other examples too. You know, we get Christmas Bells, that whole song in Rent. We get Chip on Your Shoulder in Legally Blonde. We get Disappear in Dear Evan Hansen. Usually it's a celebration. Usually it's a moment when things are going really well for the protagonist. And at this point, I mean, the character doesn't know they're in a story, right? The character doesn't know that their life is following a story structure for the benefit of an audience. They're just like, oh my god, everything's going great for me. Everything will always go great for me. There are no more problems in my life. But we as the audience, we know better. So that dramatic irony really helps to build the tension because we know the battle's not over. Remember, we've seen that something bad that's coming. And we know that everything is about to turn on its head. So it keeps us engaged, you know? Plus it's just a lot of energy and it just wakes us up a bit. You know, that's the point. It's congratulations, you're in the Emerald City. That's the TENTPOLE. But you're about to find out that the wizard isn't all he seems to be. And that's the Act 1 finale. It's congratulations, you've won the war. That's the TENTPOLE. But you're about to find out that winning was easy, but governing's harder. And that's the Act 1 finale. So this number gives us like the jolt of energy that we need to just get to the end of Act 1 without like falling asleep or getting lost. Usually it's very close to the end of Act 1. Like usually it's separated from the Act 1 finale by like maybe one low energy musical number, which is A Sentimental Man in Wicked or Dear Theodosia in Hamilton. But it comes really close to the end of Act 1. And one of the reasons for that is that it kind of sets up the twist of Act 1. Because think about it, the higher you climb, the farther you fall. The more of a celebration you set up right before the big turning point in the show, the more of a gut punch that turning point is going to be. The more joy and excitement you can pack into this TENTPOLE number, the more dramatic and shocking your Act 1 finale is going to be when the conflict explodes just like 2 musical numbers later. And there you have it. Those are 6 musical numbers that you can use in your Act 1 of your musical. Comment below if you think of any other examples of musicals that use this structure, because I really love hearing from every one of you and watching you all have discussions in the comments. It's like, that's my favorite part about doing this. So leave a comment, have a discussion. I love it. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe because there are new videos coming your way every single Saturday. And my next video in this series is going to be all about the Act 1 finale, so you really don't want to miss that. It's going to be a really good one. Thank you all so much for watching. Once again, my name is Mateo Chavez Lewis, and this has been